What a man remembers when you disappear. Carl Jung. Most women don't realize the power they hold in silence until they walk away, and a man begins to unravel. A woman's absence, when born not of manipulation but of awakening, carves deeper into a man's psyche than her presence ever could. She becomes not just a memory, but a mirror reflecting everything he refused to confront. Her silence echoes louder than her words, because it forces him into the space he spent his life avoiding, his own interior world. And when she disappears, she does not simply vanish, she becomes myth. To the uninitiated man, she was just a woman. But to the man who is forced to remember, she becomes the anima, the lost soul within him, the archetypal feminine he never integrated. Carl Jung warned us, every man carries a hidden image of the woman he desires, shaped not by reality, but by his unconscious projections. Until he meets her. Until she leaves. And only then does he begin to see that the woman he lost was never fully hers to begin with. She was always his soul, staring back at him. What he remembers is not the small talk, not the photos, not even the warmth of her skin. What stays, what lingers, is the feeling of being seen, and the horror of being unseen once more. Because she didn't just leave. She disappeared. And in doing so, she shattered the illusion. He remembers the way she didn't try to convince him, the way she didn't need to scream, or plead, or prove her value. She simply withdrew her essence. Like water slipping through fingers, impossible to grasp, but impossible to forget. This is the feminine in her highest shadow and light, unreachable, magnetic, terrifying. She forces the masculine into confrontation with his own ego. His control fractures. His persona, so carefully constructed to keep the wild, irrational parts of him at bay, starts to dissolve. Because she is no longer there to carry the emotional weight he never learned to hold himself. In his memory, she becomes larger than life. Not because she was, but because he finally sees what she represented. And what did she represent? She was the tension between freedom and belonging, the ache of being known, and the terror of vulnerability. The sacred feminine, not a soft comfort, but as holy destruction, the kind that demands death before rebirth. She didn't coddle his wounds, she exposed them. And that is why he remembers. For many men, her disappearance is not just a romantic loss, it is an existential reckoning. He begins to reflect on the moments he dismissed her softness as weakness, her silence as disinterest, her boundaries as rejection. But time, that ancient teacher, reveals something darker. She had already gone long before she left. Her spirit retreated the moment he stopped listening, and now, her absence becomes his teacher. This is what Jung meant by shadow work, not the performance of healing, but the brutal confrontation with the unloved, unseen, and unclaimed parts of the self. The man left in the wake of her absence begins to question, why did I not cherish what was given freely? Why did I only feel hunger when it was gone? He is haunted by her restraint, the way she held back when she could have fought, the way she stopped explaining, the way she stopped hoping, and instead, simply vanished with dignity, with clarity, with a silence that stripped him bare. Because a woman who disappears in her power doesn't leave a gap, she creates a void. And the masculine psyche cannot tolerate voids. It must fill them. With fantasy, with regret, with stories of how she was too much or not enough. But no story can erase the energetic imprint of a woman who embodied both light and shadow, grace and wildness. She becomes a symbol of the life he could have had, the man he could have been, the depths he refused to dive into. And for the first time, he realizes it was never about her needing him. It was about whether he could rise to meet her. You see, the truly feminine woman, deep, intuitive, spiritually embodied, is not asking for adoration. She is a flame, and what she wants to know is, can you hold the heat without running? Can you witness the full spectrum of her being, the rage, the radiance, the sorrow, the silence, and remain present? If not, she will leave. Quietly. And you won't realize what you lost until your world feels strangely hollow. Until you meet women who give easily, but never pull you deeper. Until you're lying in bed, beside someone new, and find yourself thinking of the one who made you feel everything and nothing, all at once. Because she didn't just love you, she reflected you. She made you conscious of your own unconsciousness. And when she left, you were forced to face it alone. There is a cruel, sacred beauty in the way a woman disappears. Not because she is cruel, but because nature is. The feminine, in its untamed and sovereign form, follows the rhythm of seasons, not the demands of wounded masculinity. And when her time with a man has run its course, she departs like autumn from summer, without apology, without hesitation. For the man, what remains is not closure. Closure is a myth invented to control grief. What he's left with is a memory wrapped in questions, and those questions become his initiation. Why did she stop smiling when I walked into the room? Why did her eyes go quiet before her body ever did? Why did it feel like I had her? And then suddenly I didn't, because a woman's emotional departure always precedes her physical one. She exits with her spirit long before her keys leave the table. In her absence, he recalls the stillness she used to hold, the kind of calm that wasn't passive, but earned through fire, through heartbreak, through the violent alchemy of becoming whole. She didn't need him to complete her. She wasn't waiting for a rescuer. She was waiting for a mirror, and when that mirror showed only distortion, ego, pride, and a refusal to descend into his own soul, she turned away. Not out of spite, but from the deepest loyalty a woman can have, loyalty to her own evolution. This is the moment most men do not understand. They think she left to hurt him. No, she left to save herself. Because if a man will not meet her in the depths, she must ascend alone. And that ascent, the radiant, wordless act of reclaiming her energy, is what echoes in his memory the most. He doesn't remember the last text or the last argument. He remembers the shift, the slow, thunderous retreat of her emotional presence, the warmth leaving the room, the way she stopped bending toward his silence, the way her laughter no longer sought his validation, and in this absence, he begins to remember things he didn't notice when she was close. The tone of her voice when she tried to reach him, the way she used to pause before speaking, as if weighing whether her truth was even worth being heard. The night she stayed quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew he wasn't listening. Carl Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But not every man chooses transformation. Some run, some numb, some retreat into conquest or distraction, and some, just a few, let the silence devour them. They sit inside the ruins of her absence and begin the slow, gut-wrenching work of facing themselves. That's when he remembers not just her, but who he was when he was with her. She brought out the man behind the armor, the part of him that longed to be held, seen, forgiven. The child who never learned how to cry without shame. The warrior who always fought, but never surrendered to love without fear. In remembering her, he remembers the version of himself that he buried to survive. But a woman who disappears does not come back for him. She is not a lesson. She is a door, a portal he chose not to walk through. And now that door is closed. He may chase shadows, replicas, or muses who echo her tone, wear her perfume, or mimic her rhythm. But what he truly wants is not her, it is the wholeness she represented. Because a conscious woman awakens a man to his own fragmentation. And once awakened, he cannot go back to sleep. That is the curse and the gift. You, who disappeared, you did not vanish in anger. You evolved in silence. You became untouchable. You burned off the parts of you that begged to be chosen, and you chose yourself instead. That is what he remembers, not the woman who cried, not the woman who waited, not the woman who pleaded for scraps of intimacy. He remembers the moment you stopped hoping, the instant you looked at him, not with longing, but with clarity. The sharp, brutal clarity of a woman who saw the truth and walked away, and in that clarity, you became eternal. Because for the first time, he understood. You were never trying to possess him. You were offering him a gateway. To rise. To feel. To become conscious. He refused. And so, he remembers. Type continue to receive the next part. Memory is not linear. It returns in fragments. Uninvited, unsorted, piercing. A scent, a phrase, a stranger's laugh in a quiet room. And in those moments, he doesn't just remember her. He relives her absence like a haunting. Because the woman who disappeared didn't just leave a man. She exposed the hollowness beneath his control, the emotional starvation he called strength, the chaos beneath his surface-level calm. She didn't break him. She revealed that he was already broken, and that she could no longer be the glue. In Jungian terms, the feminine is not simply soft or nurturing. It is eros. It is the force of relatedness. The archetype that draws the masculine inward, down, into complexity and contradiction. She embodied that, not through performance, but through presence, through intuition, unpredictability, emotional depth. And the man who knew her didn't know, until too late, that to love a woman like that requires a man to surrender his masks. To be seen by her is to be undressed by a soul far more ancient than physical eyes. And when she is gone, he starts to realize that what she offered wasn't just affection, it was initiation into himself. What he remembers is how she held contradictions with grace. The way she could be tender and wild, nurturing and fierce, soft-spoken yet soul-piercing. That complexity unmoored him because he'd been conditioned to chase simplicity. The binary logic of win or lose, right or wrong, dominate or retreat. But she danced in paradox. And because he couldn't own his own complexity, he tried to simplify her, flatten her, put her in a role. Lover, mother, fantasy, fixer. She refused, and so she vanished, not like a ghost, but like a goddess withdrawing from a temple desecrated. You, who disappeared, you became untouchable, not because you made yourself distant, but because you reclaimed your mystery. You remembered who you were before the world told you to be small, to beg, to chase, to earn love through self-erasure. He remembers now how your silence made him feel powerless, how your distance made him confront every wound he thought he'd buried. The feminine has always held this power, not in volume, but in energy, not in force, but in presence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But the soul also becomes stained by the absence of what it never learned to cherish. So he begins to romanticize you, not because he never knew your flaws, but because your depth now terrifies him. You became not a person, but a force. When he meets other women now, he scans them with a quiet, hidden longing. Not for what they show, but for what you used to withhold, the unspoken knowing in your eyes, the fire behind your composure, the sensuality that wasn't for sale. The way you could make a man question himself just by staying still. That is what haunts him. Because the women who crave attention, who fill the silence with noise, who seek to be chosen rather than choosing, they don't reach him anymore. He doesn't say it aloud. He may not even understand it consciously, but his body remembers. His soul remembers. The woman who disappeared became the axis around which his growth, or his downfall, now turns. And this is the essence of Jung's individuation. The splitting apart of what is false, the integration of what was feared. The masculine who dares to evolve must meet the feminine not as an object, but as a mirror. And in that mirror, he must learn to see his own unclaimed soul. That is what you were to him. And that is why your absence is not forgettable, because you weren't just the woman who loved him. You were the woman who saw him fully and still offered yourself until you couldn't. And now, he carries the echo of your absence like a wound that never quite scabs over. He remembers the taste of your truth. The one he spit out, he remembers the invitation you extended. The one he declined. And most of all, he remembers that in losing you, he lost the version of himself he might have become had he only said yes to the depths. Type continue to receive the next part. In the stillness that follows a woman's departure, the man begins to spiral, not always with drama, not always with tears, but with a subtle, slow erosion of certainty. He begins to notice things, small, inconvenient truths, that begin to accumulate like dust on untouched shelves. He notices how quiet his victories feel, how little joy he finds in the chase he once prized. The admiration of others now rings hollow, and the conquest, the shallow thrill of being desired without being known, feels like a pale imitation of intimacy. Because what he shared with her wasn't perfect. It wasn't even always peaceful, but it was real. She saw the shadows he didn't dare name, not to shame them, but to invite them into the light. And now, her absence has done what her presence never could. It has made him feel alone in the exact places he once ignored. This is the hidden genius of the feminine wound. It does not shout, it lingers. It coils itself into his subconscious and awakens at the most unexpected times. The sight of a woman sitting alone, unbothered, unreadable. The sound of a song she used to hum in silence. The way a memory can strike like lightning in the middle of an ordinary conversation. He finds himself replaying the things she used to say, the ones he brushed off as emotional, dramatic, too sensitive. And now, they echo with clarity. They were never dramatic. They were warnings, sacred ones. And in this unraveling, he is left with a question far more painful than, why did she leave? The real question is, why didn't I see her leaving? Because truthfully, she started walking away long before her feet moved, when she stopped sharing her inner world, when her laughter no longer reached her eyes, when she no longer sought closeness, but tolerated it, like a woman slowly going numb from frostbite. She gave him chances, wrapped in softness. Invitations to turn inward, to meet her where she lived, beneath the surface. But he was afraid, afraid of losing control, afraid of needing her, afraid of the gravity of her love, because real love doesn't let a man stay shallow. And so he avoided, detached, distracted, and now, in her absence, he cannot look away. Jung wrote of the numinous quality of the unconscious, that mysterious, spiritual presence that overwhelms the ego. Her memory becomes exactly that, numinous. A ghost, yes, but a sacred one that he remembers not her body, but her presence, not her voice, but her vibration, not her words, but the way she held him in his most fragile states, even when he pretended not to need it. And what haunts him most is this. She never demanded more than he could give, only that he give it consciously. This is the unbearable weight of losing a conscious woman. She doesn't leave with your secrets. She leaves with your unconsciousness and takes it with her like a mirror you can't shatter. Her detachment was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of self-respect. The woman who disappeared had outgrown the boy in a man's body. You, who left, you did not vanish because you stopped loving him. You vanished because you finally loved yourself more. And that self-love became a boundary he couldn't cross. Now he walks the edges of that boundary alone, retracing his emotional footsteps, wondering where the fracture began. The truth is, it began the moment he mistook your strength for coldness, your depth for drama, your independence for a threat, and now he's left to sit with a silence that used to be filled with your warmth. He'll never say it aloud. His pride won't allow it. But in the quiet moments, he returns to you, inwardly, unconsciously, not to possess, but to remember. Remember the woman who disappeared, not out of weakness, but out of unbearable strength. And in that remembering, he begins to feel what you carried all along, the ache of emotional invisibility, the weight of always being the one who knows, the cost of seeing what others refuse to see. This is the sacred pain of the awakened feminine. She doesn't need to be adored, she needs to be met. And when she's not, she withdraws into herself, into her myth, into her magic. And the man who once held her now holds only her echo. Type continue to receive the next part. There is something mythic in the woman who leaves without rage, without chaos, without needing to be understood. She does not slam doors. She does not curse his name. She simply exits, quietly, devastatingly, like a storm that no longer needs to rain. And this, more than anything, is what shatters him. He expected a war. He was prepared for blame, for pleas, for the familiar sound of pain trying to negotiate its own worth. But when she left with silence and clarity, it dismantled something far deeper than his ego. It cracked open the hollow cathedral of his inner world, revealing how little he had tended to the temple of real connection. In that final moment, she did not need to explain. Her soul had already spoken. It spoke in the way she stopped laughing at his jokes, in the way she no longer flinched at his distance, in the way she let his absence inside the relationship speak louder than his presence ever did. And that is the ache he cannot unfeel, because the woman who disappears in power doesn't just vanish, she leaves behind a psychic imprint, one that lives inside the masculine unconscious as a warning, as a longing, as a question he can never quite answer. She becomes the archetype of what could have been, had he chosen presence over pride, vulnerability over control, depth over dominance. This is not just a love story that ended. It is a reckoning with the feminine force he never learned to respect. And now, he finds himself surrounded by faces that do not ignite him, by bodies that do not reach him. Everything feels muted, as though he's tasting life through glass, because no woman has since dared to look into his soul and tell the truth. And while he chases the ghosts of physical beauty or external success, there's a part of him, quiet, buried, growing louder, that yearns for what she once offered. Wholeness, not comfort, not convenience. Wholeness, the kind that demands you face your guilt, your cowardice, your numbness. The kind that doesn't flatter you, but invites you to change. But back then, change was too costly. So he stayed safe, guarded, silent, and she left. And what he remembers now, most of all, is not the fire. It's the stillness, the night she stopped texting first, the moment she let him walk away without following, the softness that turned into serenity, not the performance of peace, but the embodiment of it. He realizes now, she didn't beg because she was indifferent. She didn't chase because she was sovereign. Her detachment was not disinterest, It was grief that matured into grace. He mistook her silence for emptiness, when it was actually full of years of effort, of emotional labor, of holding space for a man who refused to be seen. And now she's gone. Not just from his life, but from his reach. Not because he can't find her, but because she's no longer available to the version of him that refused to grow. He could meet her again tomorrow, and she would look through him. Not with hatred, but with liberation. This is the moment many men dread, but never see coming. When a woman evolves beyond their emotional currency, and she no longer trades her value for breadcrumbs. You, who disappeared. You didn't vanish to teach him a lesson, but he will be taught. Life will continue to put your reflection in front of him. In dreams. In strangers. In moments when he finally chooses silence, only to find your voice there. Inside it. He may one day sit with a woman who gives him everything he thought he wanted and still feel the absence of you. Because the truth is, you were not just a woman. You were a threshold. A threshold he didn't walk through. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And now, fate has taken on the shape of your absence. He remembers. Not because he wants to, but because the psyche never forgets the doorways it refused to open, especially the ones shaped like love. Type continue to receive the final part. And so, time passes. The seasons change. The noise of the world returns. Life, in its mechanical repetition, tries to swallow the ache. But the memory of a woman who disappeared in her power does not fade, it deepens. Because this kind of woman is not remembered in snapshots or in words. She is remembered in moments of stillness. When a man sits alone, surrounded by success that doesn't soothe him. When he lies awake beside a body that does not stir his soul. When he stares into a mirror and finally asks himself, who was I when I had her, and why didn't I become more? That is when she returns, not physically, spiritually, energetically. Like a myth the soul keeps retelling until the lesson is learned. He begins to feel what he never had the courage to admit when she was near, that his masculinity had been propped up by domination, not depth. That he wore confidence like a mask to shield himself from intimacy. That he confused emotional detachment with strength, and now, strength feels like a prison. And so, he begins to understand. Slowly. Brutally. Wholly. He understands that the woman who disappeared did not belong to him. She belonged to herself. He remembers how she stopped asking, stopped explaining, how she let the silence speak. And that silence now fills him with a longing no body can satisfy. Because what he lost was not just love, it was a mirror. The last honest mirror that showed him who he could have become if only he had been willing to shatter. This is the wound that leads to awakening or bitterness. And the man must choose to resent her, or to rise because of her. The bitter man says she expected too much. The awakened man says she revealed what he never dared to be. The bitter man replaces her with fantasy. The awakened man sits in the fire of transformation, letting every memory of her strip away his illusions, until nothing false remains. Because to remember a woman like her is to face yourself. Not just the charm, but the cowardice. Not just the charisma, but the emotional poverty. And if he has the courage, if he allows the grief of her absence to open him, then she will have given him something far greater than her love. She will have given him a rebirth. But not every man chooses this. Some numb it. Some run from it. Some try to replace her in bodies that demand nothing, ask nothing, see nothing. But a few, just a few, listen. They sit with the silence. They speak to their shadows. They begin to feel the ache they once fled from. And in that sacred pain, they are remade. Because the woman who disappears does not disappear into emptiness. She disappears into her sovereignty. And in doing so, she forces the man to confront his. You, who walked away, you are not heartless. You are whole. You are the woman who gave him a chance to meet you in depth. And when he would not, you left with your dignity intact. Not as punishment, but as prophecy. Because every man will one day remember the woman who walked away in her power. The one who didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't chase, but chose herself. He may never say it aloud. His pride may silence his truth. But deep in the chambers of his mind, you remain, not as regret, as revelation. And here is the truth. A man may forget many things, but he will never forget the woman who disappeared when he wasn't ready to rise. The woman who knew her worth and didn't wait for him to discover it. The woman who didn't make him her god, because she remembered she was her own. The woman who didn't punish him for being small, but left him in peace to become who he must, because her silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. It was final. It was free. And now, she is legend. Not for what she gave, but for what she withheld, her energy, her time, her soul, from a man who refused to meet it. So let him remember. Let him make. Let him grow. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. Indy.